Hey everybody, welcome back to Shapes.io. I'm Joe Mama, your host. If you look at the hub, you can see we are at level 31, which means I have completed the everything machine, and I'm going to show you how it works. But this is my second attempt at recording this, and even after cutting it down to an hour and a half, I realized that nope, this video is very rambly, and it's just so much to cover. So I'm going to try and make this a lot more concise and try to keep the cookies on a lower shelf so y'all can understand it. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at the wires layer. By the way, from here on out, there's the wires layer and there's what I'm going to call the physical layer. We're going to go back and forth in between them. So just understand when I say the physical layer, this is what I'm talking about. All the physical devices that we're used to seeing. And then the wires layer, which just try to imagine wires running overhead on a factory, and so the wires will just kind of pass over everything. But anyway, if you remember last time, we discussed this arrangement of wires, which takes the signal from the shape, from the hub of the shape we're trying to create, and then I showed you how we can take that shape, cut it into the individual layers, and then take each layer and cut it into the individual quarters. And because each shape has a maximum of 4 layers, as best I can tell, and each layer has 4 quarters, we're talking about 16 quarters, and because each quarter gives us a signal of a shape, as you can see here it's a circle, and a color. So we've got 2 signals from each quarter, 16 quarters, therefore we have 32 individual signals that we have to deal with. But we can do it because we're smart and we can handle it. So anyway, let's go up and take a look at the factory. And this is only one factory. I'm going to make several of these, but I know it looks really complicated, but trust me, it's not as bad as it looks. This really is the heart and soul of the factory right here. But before we get into how it works, what we're going to do is discuss some concepts that might be a little nebulous to some people. And understanding these concepts are pretty key to making this machine work. So, again, we're going to go between the physical layer and the wires layer. Now, in the physical layer, you can see that we have our selection of tools and components, just like we're used to, right here along the bottom. But if we go to the wires layer, that selection becomes completely different. But one part of this menu that remains the same is these top 5 components right here. The storage unit, the meter, the switch, the filter, and the display. They are visible and they are placeable in both the physical layer and the wires layer. So we're going to talk about those 5 items real quickly. First, we're going to talk about the switch. This switch, we're really just using this for demonstration purposes. This is a switch right here, and it sends out a signal. If I push the switch, in fact, let me go ahead and place another one right here. If I push the switch, it turns it on. Notice it's green, and it puts out a signal, which is 1, and that is the universal symbol for on. And if we click it again, it emits a 0 signal, which is the universal symbol for off. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply it to this filter. Okay, now this filter, pretty neat device. It's got 2 purposes. The first purpose is, as the name implies, it filters out a certain item. Let's see, can we take a look at this? Okay, so yes, we've got this filter set up to receive a signal for red dye. And as you can see, the signal goes into the filter, and I put this display here so you can see exactly what this signal is emitting. So this filter is set up to filter out anything that isn't red dye, and as you can see, there's an arrow right here. This is the approved lane that goes straight through it, and you can see the only thing going through it is the red dye, and then it comes back here, and the shape that is on the belt with it right here, with the red dye, gets filtered out on the reject lane. And notice there's 2 outputs, and one of them's got that red X. That means whatever does not meet the qualifications of the filter gets rejected down that lane. So think of it as a bypass. As you can see, both these things merge together onto the belt, so the filter has to filter out the approved content, which is the red dye, and it basically rejects the shape. Okay, now take a look at this. Another item, let's discuss real quick, is this constant signal. This constant signal you can set up. If I place this thing, you can pick what signal you want it to emit. Let's say, white. Let's have it emit a white signal, and then let's go ahead. By the way, this is display. And see, you can see it's emitting a white signal. So, pretty cool. And really, I'm not going to go through the function of every single item, but I am going to talk about the items that are critical to this machine. That's why I'm talking about these right now. So you can see right there, the filter is doing its job, and it is filtering out anything that is red dye and rejecting everything else, okay? But the filter has another function. It can function as a gate. So, in addition to taking a signal, such as a shape or a color, it can also take a signal that is either a 0 or a 1. And basically, we're not worrying about a filter now. We're just turning this gate on and off. Right now, it's in the off position. The gate, when it's in the off position, the filter in the off position, defaults to rejecting stuff onto the reject lane. See that? It's in the off position. It's receiving a signal. It has to receive a signal. See, watch this. If I cut the signal, cut the wire, now it shows this plug symbol and everything jams up. It needs to receive some kind of signal. So let's go ahead, place the wire, and now it runs just fine. Except that it's kicking everything out. It's rejecting everything because it's receiving an off signal. See that? It's a 0. It's off. Watch what happens when we turn it on. Now it allows things to go through the approved lane. Okay? And then if we turn it off, it goes back to rejecting everything. So that's an important concept. And what we can do is we could block that off. And now it functions as a gate. We just turn it on. It allows everything through. Or we turn it off and it blocks it. So that is how the filter can function as a gate. So let's go ahead and put that back in place. There we go. So now let's go over here and we're going to talk about the storage unit. So we've got a gate set up here. As you can see, we've got this gate, and if we shut it down, it's just going to back up. But look what happens. We've got this storage unit set up here as what we call an overflow gate. So notice this green star right here on the output of the storage unit. There's two outputs, but one of them has that green star. That green star is the prioritized, the preferred lane. If stuff can go out that lane, they will. If it can't, if it jams up like this, then it will be spit out this other lane. So that way, if this lane backs up, anything that comes into the storage unit will come out this lane. And basically, like I said, it acts like an overflow. So let's go ahead and open this up. And look at that. Everything goes back around the approved, the preferred lane. So if we close that gate back up, there we go, and then it gets rejected. So you'll see that I use these a lot, and I'll put a trash can right here. Instead of having this overflow right here, I'll put a trash can that just basically trashes anything that goes into the overflow. So that's why that's important to understand how that works. It's pretty simple, really. So it's kind of cool. But let's go over here. We're going to talk about some other components, and we're going to talk about gates. Again, I wouldn't discuss these if they weren't important to the machine, but they are. Okay, this is what's called an AND gate. And the way an AND gate works is it will only, see, notice it's sending out a signal. This display is off, and if I push this button, nothing happens. See, it sends out a 1. And if I turn it off, nothing happens. If I push this one, nothing happens. But if I turn them both on, it turns this on. In other words, what it's saying is, in order for me to emit a signal of 1 to turn on, I need a signal from this side and this side. That's why it's called an AND gate. Now this one here is called an OR gate. And as the name implies, it receives signals on both sides. It will send out a positive signal if it receives a positive signal on one side or the other. So notice, if we turn that on, it lights up. Turn it off, it turns off. Turn this on, it lights up. If we turn them both on, it stays lit. But it will emit a signal as long as it gets a signal from either this side or this side. So that's why it's called an OR gate. Now this one here is called a NOT gate. Notice the switch is on, but the display is off. So if we turn it off, it actually reverses the signal. It reverses the setting, Right now, the setting coming out of the switch is off, but it accepts it and say, okay, well, if I'm not receiving any signal at all, then I will turn myself on. But if it receives any truthy signal, be it a color, a shape, or a 1, it will actually turn off. See? Goes to 0. And this one is called an Xor Gate. Now, it functions in sort of like an OR gate, because if I turn this on, it turns the display on. It sends out a signal. If I turn this one on, it sends out a signal. But if I turn them both on, it turns the signal off. So that's different. Something to be aware of. And then this, hopefully this is all making sense. And again, here we have the constant signal generator. These are useful for demonstration purposes for different things, but it is important to our machine, and I'll show you why. But right now, we're going to talk about this comparator. It just says compare. If we look at, let's see, go to the wires layer, and right here, the equal sign, it just says compare. I'm going to call it a comparator. And it will return a Boolean 1 if both signals are exactly equal. And as you can see here, I've got red being emitted here, and I've got 2 comparators attached to that signal. This one is receiving a matching signal, so it's spitting out a 1. That's why the display is on. This one, it's comparing green and red, which of course are not the same, so it's spitting out a 0. Now hopefully that all made sense. So anyway, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. That would let me know that you're understanding the stuff that I'm putting out. I've got this machine here. Now what I did is I piped the signal for the shape, okay, all the way from the hub. And by the way, these wires are carrying signals. Okay, they're not carrying actual shapes, they're just carrying signals. By the way, I should tell you that when you place things in the physical layer, you have to be careful. If the wire layer exists above it, sometimes placing an item will actually cut the wires. Just be aware of that. So if I take this, let's see, actually I'll do it on a non-machine. If I take a storage unit here and place it, let's see, if I place it right here, look at that. It actually cut the wire. Okay, that's not cool. If you just have to be aware where the wires are. So let me go ahead and remove that. Just something to be aware of. I'll go ahead and replace the wire. So they're not completely independent of each other. So just keep that in mind when you place a component into the physical layer. There's a possibility it could snip a wire. So always keep that in mind. So here's a recreation of that machine that we saw earlier in the previous episode that shows that cuts up the shape signal into the discrete signals, the shape and color for each quarter. Now notice I made a couple changes here compared to the other machine. Let's go ahead and use lane 2. By the way, because there are 16 quarters, basically I have made 16 lanes of shapes and 16 lanes of colors. The way this machine works, just give you a general overview, is all the assembly and everything happens here. The shapes and components get fed in from the bottom, and the colors get fed in from the side. And using gates, I've got each color separated, and they're gated. Each color is gated from entering the main line. This is the main line right here. The color can only enter if it is approved. And I'll show you how that approval process happens. You can see I've got green, red, and blue here. They get fed into the main line. And then I've set up places where the colors get mixed. And then once they go through their mixers, then they're gated. Like right here is magenta is gated. Can't go anywhere. I've got cyan gated. You can see by the shape, though, what we need is blue and white for this particular shape. So the white is down here, as you can see, and the white is also gated, but it's being permitted to go through on its respective lanes. So, and then down here is what? Yellow? Yes, I think this is yellow. Yep, this is yellow. We don't need yellow, so the signals are keeping any of those colors from coming through. And here is the arrangement of wires. Basically, these are wires running to the gates and the filters. I'll use the term gate and filter kind of synonymously, but they're running to the filters, And like this runs to a filter. This runs to a set of filters. This blue signal from lane 1 goes to all the different filters, and it will only let blue dye through the gates. Okay, that's how that works. I wish I could make it, simplify it so you could just cut and paste it, but you just have to understand that each gate receives a signal from each lane. Okay, remember we cut up the signal into 16 quarters. We cut up the signal for the shape into 16 quarters, and that's what happens with the color. And in this case, by the way, the color signals are on the blue wires and the shape signals are on the green wires. So the blue wires, the color wires, are going up to the painters, and then they continue on to the gates, so that the gates know what colors are approved and what are not. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about what's happening here. So yeah, we've got the color signal being emitted on the blue wire, and then of course we got the full shape. It tells us what shape we need. We saw that in the last episode. But in order for the machine to filter out the proper quarter that it needs, I actually have to take this signal, this pinwheel signal right there, and slice it a couple times. You can see I've sliced it. I've used the virtual cutter, which is down here, this layer right here. This is all the virtual manipulators right here. And I used the virtual cutter and cut the shape, and then I used took one of the slices, one of the halves, did a virtual rotator, and then ran the slice again. Just basically what you would actually do to cut a shape into quarters rather than use the quad cutter, because the quad cutter isn't an option virtually. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. I took the signal, snipped it, and then rotated one of the halves, snipped it again, and then I took one of the halves, preferably the upper right. For organizational purposes, I have kept all signals for quarters, all signals in all shapes. Anytime I manipulate quarters, I try to keep them in the upper right. Scan them, paint them, everything in the upper right. It just keeps everything organized. So that's the biggest problem with this. It's the biggest challenge, is keeping everything organized. So this is lane 2 right here. This is lane 1. And of course, there are 16 similar lanes all the way down here, and they all handle everything the same. So as I talk about lane 1 or lane 2, just understand that it's happening on all the other lanes as well. So as we see, now that I've got the color I want and the exact shape that I need, then I can go to work. For the purposes of this machine, I've actually found a shape on the map that has all 4 quarters present in it. There are 4 different quarters. There's the square, the circle, the pinwheel, and the 4-pointed star. Those are the 4 different shapes, and all quarters, all shapes are represented in this shape. I got very lucky. So now I'm going to take this and just run it through a quad cutter. So now I have a supply of shapes that I need. So let's go to lane 1. As you can see, comes up here, goes to the quad cutter. And obviously it cuts it into 4 quarters, but I actually set up, notice how all of them are in the upper right now? If you look at these rotators, that's what I did. I rotated each shape into the upper right. Does that make sense? So it just makes it easier. So now, if you look, we've got the shape signal coming up here, the green shape signal. Notice we're looking for the upper right circle. So notice there are 4 filters, one for each lane, one for each type of shape that's needed. And that's receiving the upper right quarter circle signal. And if it doesn't get that, it rejects it. So that's what the filter is doing. Just like we talked about how the filter works, it's taking any shape that doesn't match that signal and rejecting it. And I put a display right here so you can see what it's looking for. That's the signal that's currently needed in this lane, and here's a display showing the color, which in this case is blue. Just for, visual reference, so you can kind of look and see, oh yeah, yep, it's doing what it's supposed to. So as you can see, it needs the circles, and it happens to be, now this display, by the way, is not just for this filter, it's for all the filters. It's reading the signal for this whole lane. So yes, it receives that signal, and it happens to be that this filter right here is the filter, is on the lane that's that has the circle, the quarter circle. So it's the only one that's running an approved shape. And on this one, and the one next to it, notice it's the quarter pinwheel. So you can see that lane is the only one spitting out a shape. So that's how these filters work. It's basically filtering out everything we don't need and trashing it. But we need the circle for this lane. So now we come up to this little doohickey right here. Now that we've got the shape we need to paint it the color that we need. Let's see, we need blue, so it's going up this lane here. And what's this other lane for? Well, let me tell you. Let's watch what happens. Okay, right here, now here's another, this storage unit right here, same as over here, is an overflow. It's keeping this from backing up. And the reason I don't want it to back up is that when we get the shape we need in the quantity we need it, then immediately the hub is going to send us a new signal, and we don't want old components jamming up the painter, because you know stuff gets stuck in the painter. We don't want things jamming up. Now, here's the thing. You know how painters and stackers work. In order for painters and stackers to work, I throw stackers in this as well, even though we haven't gotten there yet, it will be important. Painters require an input of a shape and an input of a color. If it doesn't get either one of those things, it stops. If no shapes come into it, the color stops. It jams up. If no color comes into it, any shapes that are coming into it jam up. They stop. So it has to have two feeds that are full of stuff. It has to have color and it has to have a shape. That's important. Right now, that's not a problem. But what happens if we have a shape or a quarter of a shape that is not supposed to be colored? What happens if it's, oh, we need a gray shape. We need a gray quarter circle. Well, this is what happens. Notice this lane right here bypasses the painter completely. You see that? There's a double painter right here. There's two painters in parallel. This lane bypasses it. Now, how does this lane know it needs to send stuff down the bypass? I will show you. Here's the filter. And in this case, we're using the filter as a gate. Now, there is no gray paint if it's uncolored. In fact, you can do this. You can set up a constant signal generator. It's going to ask you what signal. Notice there's gray. Even though there's no actual gray on the map, it allows us to send out a gray signal. So if here's the color, this is our color signal coming from our shape analyzer from down below. If it analyzes it and sends a gray signal, then that gray signal comes up here. And then it gets compared. Remember we looked at the comparator earlier? And I'm sending out a constant gray signal right here. And right now they don't match, so it's sending out a 0. It's sending out an off signal. So anything going into the filter is, and I'm sending that off signal to the filter. Or in this case, again, it's functioning as a gate. And because that is an off signal, it's anything that's coming into it is just going out the reject side, and that reject side goes to the painter. Now, if all of a sudden we get a signal for a gray, a gray color, and this matches, and we realize, hey, these two match. It's gray. This is gray and this is gray. So let me open the gate and send it on this lane. Basically, what the machine is saying, don't paint it. Bypass the painter. Because again, if we don't need paint, then if we don't need to paint the item, then we can't just send it through the painter without paint. And if it goes into the painter and there's no paint coming in, it's not going to just send it out gray. It's just going to actually jam the painter up. So we need to bypass the painter completely. So that's what this is for. This circuit is just in case we get a call for a unpainted shape. It will bypass, run up here again, it'll bypass the whole painting machine. But for now, that's not needed. This part is pretty self-explanatory. You notice that, oh, you know what? Let me show you something right here. Notice how I put a wire crossing right here? That's because there is a signal that comes out the side of these storage units, and it ran very close to this wire, and it would send a fault signal on that wire. If I did not put that there, it would connect to the wire and send a fault signal, and I don't want to do that. I don't want the signal that's emitted from here to contaminate the signal in the green wire. So that's why that's there, so they don't touch. It's an insulator. Think of it like an insulator. Okay, so now we've talked about the coloring, or we've talked about the creating of the shape, and we've talked about the coloring of the shape. So then what happens next? This is a little bit complicated. Okay, so now we're coming to stacking. Now, in order for a stacker to work, it needs two inputs. If either input isn't there, it jams up. And I think we all know that from having played this game. If you've only got one input coming in, it doesn't do anything. Let's take note of something. Before it goes into the stacker, remember how we used the rotators to rotate everything into the upper right corner? Well, basically you need to reverse that process now. Before they go into the stacker, in this case a merger actually, we're going to start putting each individual layer together before we stack the layers. But in order to do that, we have to put all the quarters back in their proper orientation. So basically, this is where I put the rotators in that rotate it back to their original configuration. We've got basically all the quarters in the proper orientation we need. Each lane, by the way, I mean, one constant in this lane right here is that it is responsible for the upper right quarter of the first layer. And this one right here is responsible for the upper left quarter of the first layer. And this is the, what is this? This is the lower left, and this is the lower right. So that's why we just need to, these rotators, just put them right back where they belong. But, okay, as I said, a stacker can only stack something if it receives input from both sides. Otherwise, it jams up. So here's how this works. Lane 1 has to make a decision. Do I go through the stacker or do I bypass it? Notice there is a bypass set up here. Same on lane 2. There is a bypass. And how does it know if it needs to bypass? It has to know what's going on lane 2. So what I did was, I told lane 1, the filter that's on lane 1 is looking for a signal. I did something kind of different here. I put an OR gate. An OR gate is going to make this thing function, make this filter function like a gate. So the OR gate is putting its output straight into the filter, turning it into a gate. So basically, if it's a 1 or a 0, that's the only input that gate's going to get. And that 1 or 0 is going to be determined by whether or not there is a shape on lane 2. As you can see, lane 2 is emitting a shape. A shape is existing on lane 2. It's needed. So lane 1, we know there's a shape on lane 1. It says, okay, if there's a shape on lane 2, then I can go into the filter, I can go into the stacker. So what we did was we set this gate up so that if it receives a signal from lane 2, it opens up this filter, opens up this gate, and allows stuff to go through it into the stacker. And lane 2 is doing exactly the same thing. This shape coming in says, let's see, I got to go into the stacker. Is there a shape on lane 1? And it has an OR gate right here, and its filter is receiving a signal, or rather the OR gate is receiving a signal. The OR gate is receiving a signal from lane 1's shape. Okay, the shape signal from lane 1 is activating the gate on lane 2 using this special arrangement. So that way, lane 2 is saying, okay, there's a shape on lane 1, so I can go through the stacker because I know that that shape and I are going to be stacked. So since there are shapes on both lanes, the stacker will be used. If either lane does not have a shape on it, it needs to bypass and go around the stacker. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So the same arrangement is set up between lanes 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and so on to lanes 15 and 16. Now we have two halves coming out of the stacker. We have halves. See this? Now notice I put these overflow gates so stuff doesn't back up. So now we've got these two halves. We have to put them together. But again, what if lanes 3 and 4 have nothing? Lanes 1 and 2 has a shape. So the shape coming up lanes 1 and 2 basically says, okay, I'm going through another stacker right here. It's right there. Is there anything on lane 1? Or is there, I'm sorry, lanes 1 and 2 is checking, is there anything on lanes 3 and 4? So we had to do things a little bit differently this time. because we're not looking for any one individual shape, we're checking to see if there's any shape on lane 2. So what I did was I set up an OR gate here, another OR gate. It's actually comparing the signals between 3 and 4. The signal comes up from 4 and comes up from 3 and is being compared. So it's not compared, they're being read, and if either of those has a shape on it, this OR gate right here sends a signal. If either lane 3 or 4, even if it's just one of them, has a shape, this says, okay, yes, something will be coming up this pair of lanes. I'm sending out an on signal. And then, so the gate for lanes 1 and 2 is receiving that on signal. You can see it. And it opens the gate, because if there's something on lane 1 and 2, as long as there's something coming up lane 3 and 4, it will go through the stacker. And lane 3 and 4 is doing the same thing. Its gate right here is being checked by a similar arrangement over here on lane 1 and 2. It's checking on lane 1 and 2 to see if there's anything on either lane. Yes, there is. It opens that gate, and then it goes through the stacker and completes the first layer. And I've done the same thing with lanes 5, 6, 7, and 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. You can see it. Okay, that's this level right there. So then we go up again. So now the first layer is about to be stacked on top of the second layer. And again, it does a similar check. Okay, the second layer, which is lanes 5, 6, 7, and 8, is checking. It says, well, okay, is there anything on the first layer? No? Then I will bypass it. If there is, which of course there is, I'll go through the stacker. Okay? So that's what's happening there. Now the layers are checking each other out to see if anything needs to go through the stacker. And the same is happening here. These are paired up. They're checking each other. And then they will stack if anything needs to be stacked. But as you can see, there's nothing there right now. Nothing at all. And then the last is the final stacker to stack the 2 layers here with the 2 layers coming from the other side. And as you can see, it's doing a comparison. It is doing a check. The lanes 1 through 8 are checking lanes 9 through 16, and it's receiving nothing. Okay, see that? There is no signal coming from 9 through 16, as we know. So instead of going through the stacker, it's running through the bypass. We're only doing 2 layers. It's pretty awesome. I realize that's really complicated, and I'm, put a question in the comments if you have anything as to how that works. But all I can tell you is it does work, and if all these concepts make sense, it's a lot to take in, but I assure you, it does work, as you can see. So you notice, though, the rate at which they're coming out is pretty slow. It's 1.1 per second, and we need like 5 per second. So I'm going to show you the way I kind of cheated the system. Now, my intention is going to be, this is the north factory. I want to make one in every direction, east, west, south. A similar factory, but that's a lot of work. So let me show you what I've done. I've created an automated system. So everything's coming down. Let's go toward the hub. All these shapes, as they're being made, are going back down to the hub. So let's do that now. Let's click on the hub thing there. Now that's the shape we need, of course. Now pay attention to these 4 feeds right here. We're going to go this way, right up to here. Now the shapes are coming down here. Oh wow, that filled fast, didn't it? So I've set up this system right here. Now you can add more storage units if you like. That's up to you. But we are just letting these things collect, okay? And then what we'll do is we set up an automatic timer. Every so often it flushes these things out and lets them come in a mad rush. So they will come down here and they will, I mean, look how many there are. These belts are full and they're running at currently, what is it? About 17 items per second. So, I mean, if we got 4 belts worth, that's close to, what is that, around 70? I think that's 68 Might be wrong, that's about 68 items per second, so we should be able to meet that. We just have to let them collect. Okay, guys, we're gonna insert this piece of video here. I actually was about to explain to you a very convoluted system of a clock, when in reality, there's another way to make a clock, and it's a whole lot simpler than what I had in mind. But the bottom line is, what we need to do is we need an automated signal that's going to stay closed long enough for these storage units to collect the necessary shape in sufficient quantities, so that when we turn the signal on and we release the gates, that a good rush of items continues to the hub, just like that. And then that would give us the sufficient the rate that we need, even though our machine, our single machine, can't produce the rate that we need to meet the 5 per second. I mean, it's only producing about 2 per second right now. But so we're, like I said, we're spoofing the system a little bit by allowing the items to collect. And as I said, these gates will stay closed until a signal turns them on every so often, and when it does turn them on, all these shapes will go spilling into the hub, and they'll go in so fast and so frequent that it will easily meet the 5 per second. We don't have to sustain it, we just have to hit that 5 per second for a very small amount of time. So, like I said, by collecting it and releasing it occasionally, that's what we're going to do to meet that demand. But in order to do that automatically, now I've got a button set up here that will release it. But in order for us to do it automatically, we need a timer. And I had a convoluted system designed, but I realized that that isn't what needs to happen. So you can forget all of these storage units over here or anything like that. That's not necessary. So what we're going to do, we're going to allow this storage unit to empty, and then we're going to take it right out of the system. All we need is this big long serpentine belt, and then the return comes back around, then the serpentine belt again, and a counter anywhere on the system. Okay, that's emptied. Good. Now I will say this much. We do need one thing. All of these need to be in a bunch. You know what I mean? They have to be very close together. So therefore, when they go through, let's see. Okay, in fact, I'm going to stop this right there so that that bunches up. When all of these come together and bunch up, this is all you need to do. You need to make sure that all of the items on the belt, they can be any item, and just make sure they're in a bunch so that as they pass through the meter, they give a nice steady signal. What I'm trying to do is have a signal that turns on occasionally. And the way this clock, this is a clock, it takes a certain amount of time for all the paint pellets to make it all the way around the serpentine belt. But we need a signal that's off most of the time so that, actually, let's see, let's go ahead. Once this stops, we'll put this belt in place. We need a signal that stays off long enough to hold those gates closed. Okay, so we put that in place. And now it's just circling around. None of this matters. We don't have to worry about it. I won't even confuse you by explaining what I was trying to do. It was stupid. Okay, so what we need, let me reiterate, we need a signal that comes on long enough to release the contents of these containers. In fact, let's go ahead and flush it out again. We need it to release the contents of these containers, and then once they're released, basically close back up so that the items can collect again, and then they start to build up, and then once we have a sufficient number, then it opens right back up again. And that will be dependent on time. It won't actually be reading the contents of these containers. All it's going to do is it's going to be purely based on time, on how long it takes for these paint pellets to go around and hit this meter. And as the paint pellets go through the meter, it's going to emit an on signal. But once they pass through, the signal turns back off. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that signal right there. So let's see if we can get it to work. Put that in place. There it goes. It's going. And there it flushed the system out, did it not? Yes, there it goes. It flushed the system, and it stayed open for a brief amount of time. Now it's closed. And let's see if that's enough. Let's see if that's enough to set this off and meet the requirements, because I think we got the shape we need in it, right? That's got to do it. I bet that did it. It just might take it a little bit to register. Yes, no, maybe so. Okay, why is it... No, I guess not. Yep, there it goes. It was enough. Good. So now we've got this other shape that's being produced. Hopefully, it's going to take a little bit for the machine to switch everything over. But yes, it worked. But anyway, that's it. That's how the clock works. And that's all you need to make. It's super, super simple. I don't know why. I just pay no attention to the BS that I came up with. But basically, set up a long serpentine track, and you can time it yourself. Obviously, every time you upgrade your belts, that time is going to get shorter and shorter because the belts go faster and faster. But you can always add more loops if you want to keep a certain time. If you want to keep the timer to a certain time. And then again, the duration of how long these gates stay open is dependent upon how many items you have in the belt. In other words, how long does it take for that big mass of items to go through the counter? And during that time, the signal stays on and opens these gates. And then once the mass of stuff passes through, the gates shut and then allow stuff to build up so that hopefully by the time... I'm going to go ahead and flush these out again. Eventually, you're going to have the proper shape. There's going to be some Frankenstein shapes that are in between the last one and the current one as the machine switches over between all the different colors and shapes. It'll take a little bit of time. There's what we call a hysteresis delay for that. But in the meantime, this timer will keep going. It'll keep flushing the system out. There's no harm in sending the wrong type of shape to the hub. You just won't get credit for it. That's all. But eventually, depending on how you want to play it, you can set up overflow, like this is an overflow gate right there. You can set up overflow gates to kind of prevent this stuff from happening. But this is just kind of a rudimentary system for bypassing the fact that we don't have machines enough to meet. I mean, now we need 5 per second. We just don't have machines enough to make 5 per second of the shape. Like I said, I want to build shapes. I want to build machines in all 4 directions so that together they can meet the demand. But until then, here's a system that you can use to fake the system into believing you're producing that many shapes per second. Does that make sense? Well, hopefully all of this made sense. Again, leave questions in the comments, anything that might be bugging you, and I'll do my best to answer them as best I can. Hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully in the future we'll have more concepts that we can chew on, and I'll do my best to answer those as well and address them and see, maybe come up with solutions. We shall see. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. That would really help me out. Lets me know that this is the sort of stuff you want to see, and it won't cost you a thing. But anyway, again, have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao.